Hello everyone, Johannes Keating here, a subscriber and questioner who attended a workshop that I did as well recently by Josette. I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name, but I think most of you know who I mean. She asks me, Josette got me wondering about how many other ISTDP therapists prioritize making the distinction between front and cellar door defenses and then pursue the front door defenses in similar ways and with similar vigor. There are more parts to this question, but I'll break it up into chunks. So first of all, let's make sure we're on the same page in terms of our terminology. And I'm not speaking as an expert on Josette, because I'm certainly not one. That was like the only workshop I've ever attended with her. But here's my understanding. Front door defenses refer to defenses that ward off real contact with the other person or the world. They ward off the stimulus. So this is a defense at the level of the stimuli, at the stimulus. Okay. Cellar door defenses refer to a defense at the level of the response within us. So that's what we do to avoid internally experiencing emotions, impulses internally. Okay, so in my mind, that's what this means. Whether or not that lines up with how Josette defines it, I have no idea. So basically, front door defenses, what we do to avoid, or what the patient does to avoid emotional closeness and intimacy with you, the therapist. Cellar door defenses, what the patient does once he or she has allowed contact with you, the therapist, what the patient does to avoid the internal experience of her feelings and impulses in response to that contact. So there's an important principle or two here right off the bat that I want to highlight. So generally speaking, when we ask a patient what brings them to therapy, we want to milk the inquiry phase for all it's worth. If we're getting useful, psychodynamically significant information from the patient, we want to go with that, and we don't want to impede the flow of that. So we're not going to lock horns with defenses or pursue them with vigor if the patient is sharing useful, helpful information that helps us get to know them. Okay, so that's number one. Now, when we begin to see tactical defenses, and that's another term for front door defenses, at least in my book, but when we begin to see tactical defenses like gaze avoidance or a nervous smile, then typically you want to point it out. But what Davenlu said was not to lock horns with it, not to dwell on those tactical defenses. Simply point them out. So I noticed that you smile. Is that a nervous smile? Right? And then you go, but you were saying, and then you move on. Okay? And you point them out that way in order to prevent the tactical defenses from gaining a head of steam and derailing the whole process. So the idea is that you milk the inquiry phase for all it's worth, but as tactical defenses begin to crop up, you sort of gently comment on them without the intention of really hunkering down and dwelling on the defenses. So commenting, and then, so where were we? And then you move on. Okay, that's what I've been taught. Now, the thing about that is that when you do that, those tactical defenses will either simply dissipate and melt away, or if they are connected to a major resistance, a major column of defense, then that major resistance or that major column of defense will begin to emerge from the patient's depths, if you will, and the defenses will begin to harden and crystallize. When you first begin to see tactical defenses or front door defenses, the nervous smile or the gaze avoidance or the making jokes or what have you, if you prematurely confront them, and by that I really mean confront like in a tone of confrontation, like you're being cruel to yourself or whatever, from my point of view, that can be really problematic. Like premature confrontation can be something that derails an entire course of treatment and causes a misalliance. So I would be wary of vigorously pursuing tactical defenses right off the bat. The other incredibly important principle is to make sure that the patient can first see their defenses. They see the function of the defense, they see the cost of the defense, they turn against the defense before you really engage in confrontation and challenge. Now, there's exceptions to that, but that's, by and large, that's a pretty decent rule of thumb. Okay? So my concern with vigorously pursuing tactical defenses right off the bat is that you might engage then in premature challenge. However, if the tactical defenses or the front door defenses are really representing a threat to the flow of the treatment and to the therapeutic alliance, and it's really gumming up the gears, and you're not getting any more useful information, the patient is no longer doing their part but bringing therapy to a halt, then you betcha that you pursue that with vigor. But what that vigor looks like is, again, first helping the patient see what's happening, that they're becoming passive or compliant or deflecting with humor or smiles or putting on a happy face or whatever it is. You bet that you want to focus on that, but you don't do it in a confrontational way until the patient can see that this is hurting them. Not just taking your word for it that it's hurting them, but they actually really see it. And so, for example, if you have a patient that tends to be compliant and agreeable, and you start saying things like, well, isn't this a very cruel way that you treat yourself, and things of that nature, often you really end up just scolding the patient. And they might agree with you and go, yeah, it is. I'm really treating myself in a cruel manner. But they just experience you scolding them. Like, shame on you for being so cruel towards yourself. So I'm not at all saying that is what Josette recommends or stands for, not at all. But I can see that being an easy to make mistake if you don't really adhere to these principles. The next part of the question: it seems that recognizing transference resistance and working in the transference are fairly universal in ISTDP and most dynamic therapies. The subscriber goes on, I'm curious about your thoughts and approach to working with resistance against emotional closeness at the outset of therapy, confronting these types of defenses right away and with a degree of relentlessness. So I think I've alluded to my thoughts on this, but let me drive it home. When resistance against emotional closeness begins to impede the flow of therapy and jeopardize the progress and jeopardize the working alliance, then it needs to be addressed. But I would not initially address it by being confrontational. I would address it by simply pointing it out to the patient in a calm, matter-of-fact manner. I would try to draw the patient out to see whether or not the patient can see that the defense is actually hurting them and working against them. I would be wary of introducing that idea myself too forcefully in order not to pull for compliance. So in a very collaborative spirit, I tend to point out the resistance against emotional closeness, see if I can get a genuine agreement with the client that it really is hurting them and hurting our therapy. And down the road, depending on how that goes, yes, I might become confrontational. Pursuing that with vigor, well, it depends on what we mean by that. As my confidence and my faith grows that the patient and I are really on the same side, turned against the defenses, at that point my vigor will increase and grow, and I'll become more confrontational because I will know that the working alliance is there and the patient and I are truly on the same side. So at that point, yeah, I pursue it with vigor, and there is real confrontation or talking down to the superego. But doing that prematurely can be fatal to any course of treatment and to any therapeutic alliance. But if you mean by vigor that I don't let it slide, that I address it as soon as it begins to impede the course of the therapy session, yeah, you betcha, of course. In terms of addressing resistance or avoidance against emotional closeness, I will say that is a difficult skill set to get really good at. I will say that I do believe that some people underestimate the need to address it and to address the origins of it, which typically involve the patient having mixed feelings towards you. A lot of people go for those mixed feelings without adequately addressing what the patient is doing to avoid letting you close to them. All right, so here's the review. We don't lock horns with tactical defenses when they begin to emerge. We don't dwell on them, but we do want to comment on them, not using a confrontational tone. Simply, I noticed that you smile. Do you notice that as well? Is that a nervous smile? So anyway, where were we? And then you keep going. And then I noticed that it is hard for you to make eye contact, or that your eye contact is inconsistent. Do you notice that as well? Uh-huh. And then you keep going. So anyway, you were saying, okay. And then one of two things is going to happen. Those tactical or front door defenses, they will evaporate, and the client will become more engaged, more cooperative, and share more meaningful, helpful, psychodynamically significant information. Or the major resistance will come out, and it will be clear that those tactical defenses are tied to a major resistance, a major way that the patient is blocking the progress of therapy by keeping you at a distance and by avoiding the internal experience of what they're feeling. So we need to be really careful not to engage in premature confrontation. However, when the flow of the therapy is impeded and the resistance really begins to crystallize, then, yeah, you betcha that you want to pursue it with vigor. But the idea is to first help the patient see it, see the function of the defense, see the cost of the defense, and the patient really needs to begin to turn against the defense before, generally speaking, before you become confrontational. If you engage in premature confrontation, you have a misalliance on your hands. So, but yeah, assuming all of that is happening, if the patient sees the defense, the function, and the cost, and is turning against it, and genuinely declares they don't want to do them anymore, they want to relinquish that defense. Yeah, you want to be very relentless, you want to be very confrontational with a lot of clients. Not all clients, everyone is different, but that's a very effective way of working for a lot of clients. So down the road, when you're in the phase of working through, that's when you, at times, you can simply ignore the tactical defenses and just press ahead. I really loved these questions because it gave me an opportunity to underscore some really, really important principles. So thank you so much. That'll be all for now. Until next time.